Hello and welcome to Smart Money Simplified with Brent Mekosh. Brent, how are you?
Doing pretty good. It's Tuesday. Memorial Day weekend is done, so ready to start a new week here. How about yourself?
Yeah, it was a great weekend. Went to a small service and it was just beautiful. It was nice and got to meet some pretty amazing folks in that. But yeah, ready to get back to work and get going. And I know that you've got a guest on the show. You always bring on amazing guests. Who'd you bring on today, and what are you guys talking about?
I do. I've got Rilus Dana on. He's a second generation estate planning attorney here in Arizona, and really wanted to have this conversation because questions I'm getting from clients lately, a lot to do with AI. That's for sure. A lot to do with securing digital assets, and also getting a lot of questions from clients that might be new to the state of Arizona because Arizona, I think we're in the fastest growing metropolitan area in the entire country. It's common law state. It's a little, scrap that. Go back. Rilus, I've been doing a bone broth cleanse for 3 days, and I'm calorie deficient right now. We are not common law state. We are a community
Community
property state.
property.
Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. All right. Where do we start here, Eric?
I'm just right there. We
Okay.
are. You can just say that.
Okay. All right. And particularly, in Arizona, we've got a lot of people moving into the valley, which is a little different. We're community property states. There's a lot of specific rules around that. But I really wanted to bring Rilus in because, as listeners to this show know, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Rilus is as well. He's made a number of different posts lately about AI and the impact it has on estate planning. Digital assets, obviously, a big focus for him as well. And he's, I guess, leading his group is what he calls next generation estate planning. And I want to talk a little bit more about that concept as well. So, Rilus, hopefully I gave you a decent introduction, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself to get started?
That's great. Thanks for having me. Really excited to talk about AI, kind of nerd out, talk about those things. Glad that caught your interest. I think that's a great intro. Second generation estate planning attorney. So I just turned 42, and I feel like my age. I don't know how you are, Brent. I think you're pretty close, but we
49, 50 in a couple of weeks.
we remember life before the internet, though. I think is significant. So I'm of the generation where I remember life before the internet, but yet I've always kind of grown up with it. Like it got popular while I was in college. So the first struggle, I say struggle, like in my legal career, when I first started, attorneys were first dealing with the internet. In the early 2000s, internet was new on the scene. Attorneys were worried about legal Zoom was going to take their job, all those things. And I feel like AI is a lot of the same conversation as well.
And
So
and and so particularly, you bring up a great point there. I think that I mentioned I'll be 50 actually in a few weeks now, and our generation is definitely unique because you had obviously those that came before us. All this stuff came at sort of the middle or the tail end of their careers, and the young people that are coming up right now, they were essentially born with it. They don't know what life was like without having all this information at your fingertips. And we're unique in the sense that we didn't have this when we were younger. In my case, I didn't have an email account until I went to college, which is hard to believe. I didn't have a Yahoo account until I was actually out of college and working at that point. Cell phone, I was working, for a couple of years at that point. So give me an idea in terms of from an estate planning perspective, how now having access to all this information, how given all the tools that are available now to anybody, to everyone, how has that changed your role as an estate planning attorney?
yeah, I feel like there's what I call old school attorneys or the old way. Before the internet, attorneys didn't have to be good, right? The public was kind of forced to go to them for answers. They couldn't look up on Google easily and see how things worked. So I feel like that old generation of attorneys was kind of lazy. They were used to just making a lot of money for doing very little. And in my career, I've catered more towards the younger type of consumers who demand good service and want to be want to know what's going on. So one of my core values is empowerment, and I call it, that's like the opposite of that old way, in that I'm trying to educate my clients and teach them and let them choose what they want, as opposed to trying to scare them and using fear and forcing them to come to me.
I think you bring up a great point there. It's been a complaint that I've had about my own industry pretty much since I've been involved in it, is what we're doing, at least in my office, probably a little bit more of a secret alchemy in your office, but it's not rocket science. And I think that the goal is obviously to guide people through that process, arm them with the information, the tools they need to make good decisions themselves. But to your point, most people that by the time they get to either working with you or me, they're pretty intelligent people. They've been pretty successful with their lives overall, and they can do a lot of this stuff. What they're looking for is someone to just maybe sift through what's given the volume of information we had, sift through what's important and make some sense of it. But you bring up an interesting point. So you're targeting a demographic that's say in our demographic, you want to call us Gen Xers or maybe even a little bit younger than that or slightly older. From the clients that you're working with, particularly around some of these digital assets, what is the difference in terms of their level of knowledge? Say someone's 75, 80 years old versus someone, say 40 or 45 years old.
Yeah. So Arizona passed in 2016. It's called the Revised Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Asset Act. It's a mouthful, RUFADA. So I've been interested in this since then. And here's the problem that we're solving. This even affects, the 75-year-olds or older clients, but it's as simple as information. It used to be more on paper, right? Like bank statements and just in general, things were on paper. And then the shift in the last 20 years, we've gone more digital. And what I realized early in my career, so again, this was even before law school. I was working at my dad's firm, 2002, and someone called and they said, "Hey, my parents passed away. I found this 20-year-old binder, but there's no financial information in here. How do I figure out where they're banking at and what they own?" So the first time I got that call, I was like, "Man, good question. Let me go see." I was a young college kid. So I went to the attorneys and paralegals, and let me ask you, you probably get this too, Brent, but in your case, your client, you probably know your client's information or things like that. But what do you think someone would do in that situation?
In terms of for the child's case, if a parent passed away,
Yeah.
it depends. And that's a real struggle because, and sometimes justifiably so, many parents may not want to have that discussion with their kids. They may not want the kids to know what is out there. But to your point, it can be one heck of a mess when people pass away and there isn't a clear roadmap in place in terms of what to do, or even like you said, how to access this information. Because sometimes, I mean, I've got, I don't know, dozens and dozens and dozens of different online, accounts that I access, as I'm sure you do as well. There are sometimes where you get hiccups getting into your own stuff, particularly using password managers and protectors and all that. Let alone if you are trying to put things together with a parent. So I mean, you bring up a really big problem here.
Yeah. So the answer kind of surprised me. The paralegal said, "Tell them to look around the house for bank statements." I was like, "Man, that's obvious, right? But we're a law firm, like what's our answer?" They're like, "We don't know. We haven't seen them in 20 years either. We don't have any extra info."
Yeah.
So if they can't find any bank statements, have them start getting the mail. That was our other answer. You'll see what shows up in the mail. And about the third or fourth time that call came in, I started to realize the problem there. So I think the first step with digital assets, it's more simple than what people think, right? You don't have to be internet famous or use all the technology to benefit from this first level of digital asset planning. So there wasn't really a good answer to this until this law was passed in 2016. That law that I referenced earlier, RUFADA, it defines digital assets as your information that's stored on your behalf electronically. And it says that you can control that information in your estate planning documents. So I got really excited because I was like, finally, this is the way we give a better answer, because the internet and email is not going away.
Right.
And I saw how people are kind of struggling in between, right? If they're not storing things on paper, how do people figure out how do people find the paper trail later if there's no paper? So I'd say that's the first part of digital asset planning. It's really simple. And what I do in my estate plans, the first level in the trust, the last will and testament, all powers of attorney, I say that your agents and the people that are in charge can get information about your accounts limited to the type of account, who's the owner, and who's the beneficiary. Because that's the first struggle,
Right.
just figuring out what's out there. And we don't want to give too much information. I think a lot of attorneys miss this digital asset planning. They just put a general clause in their documents. but I think that's both too broad and not specific enough. So
Yeah, so
uh,
give me an idea of what you think many other attorneys are doing from a from a broad perspective versus what needs to be included in these documents to make it workable.
yeah, so what I've done, I have that general statement because I don't want to give too much authority over digital assets, so that my general statement is really limited, meaning I say that they can just get information about the accounts. So just an inventory of the accounts. And the problem that solves, you're probably aware of this, Brent. If someone calls your office and says, "Hey, do my parents have an account there?" You can't tell them anything yet, right? You got to figure out who they are.
Yep.
Are they named as a beneficiary on that account? If so, then you could tell them. Is it owned by a trust? Then maybe you can tell them if they're the trustee of that trust.
Right.
But that's the challenge that people go through. So if you can't find statements or anything, and you think there's something at a bank, you first have to prove that you have the authority to get that information.
Right.
So we take that first general approach, and then I have a separate digital asset trust. So when leaving instructions, I think it's important to get really specific. So for email, what I recommend is that clients list their emails, not their work ones because their work owns that, but their personal emails, list them and give your trustee the ability to get a list of emails received. It's called the Catalog of Electronic Communications. I use their language straight from that act. So basically, it's like back in the paper days, it's the equivalent of we could see the envelopes. You could see the envelopes, but not open and see the messages.
Right.
So that request, it makes it easy for the tech companies to approve, makes it easier because we're not asking for content.
Right.
And then it's also where I'm not asking my clients to give up too much information.
So clarify that for me. So basically what you're enabling is just to see an inventory of how many messages there are and where they're from, but not the content.
Correct.
Okay.
So I call them the paper days. Back in the paper days, right? If all the statements were on paper, if something happened to you suddenly, people could start getting your mail, see what type of statements show up. So it's just the same thing in our modern day where they can get, we don't want to rely on that. I want to leave good records. I encourage people to leave good records and not rely on that. But at least that's something that's kind of a catch all. And then the other type of digital assets, maybe this is my younger clients more, but really it's everyone now. If you're taking pictures on your phone, I think is the next common thing. Where are they? Where are those pictures, right? Are they on your
Right.
phone or do they back up to the cloud? So if they back up to the iCloud or Google Drive, then they may expire with you. So that's something that people are starting to catch up on. Unfortunately, it's because they're losing it, right? They're seeing it after the fact, after someone passes away, and they go, "Oh no, they had all the pictures on their phone. How do we get those?"
Hmm.
So
That's
that's
that's a great point.
yeah. So I feel like one of my most treasured items, I would say, is my YouTube channel of my kids. It is my personal one. I'm not, where it's just a way to record family videos, and it's an easy way to share them and store them. And then in my digital asset trust, it says copy that to my children.
Okay.
So that way I don't have to store all the videos. My kids can watch them. It's kind of fun now. They're teenagers now, and some of their friends have found the channel. So they kind of tease them. It's a way that their friends can see more information about them. But I think a lot of times after someone passes away, money's great, all that, right? We know all the answers for that, but a lot of times what people really miss is those memories and those human assets.
Yeah.
Like an example I've heard a lot, like if you have a voicemail from someone, I don't know if that's ever happened to you. If you have a
Mhm.
voicemail from someone, a friend, and then maybe they pass away. So
I've
it's
got a
like,
few that have saved actually. Yeah.
yeah. So it's like, ooh, like that's so special. Um, the voice. Here's a good transition into AI. I feel like things are going to get really weird here. So I've been really interested in this AI technology for a lot of things. I don't know if you heard about this, but I saw in the new Apple update, I haven't gotten into it yet, but the new iOS update, there's a feature where you can record your voice. So in case you lose your voice, it can act for you.
I've not seen that either. That's interesting. And I want to talk about that, but just this is more from a personal question that I have. You mentioned these photos. So hypothetically speaking, the proverbial truck comes along and takes someone out. I've got 57,000 photos and videos on my iCloud account, which I have copied then in Google, and I've also got copied on OneDrive. So it's in 3 different places. What happens to that stuff if the truck had taken me out last night?
So the answer depends, right? That's always the attorney answer, right? But it
Yeah.
depends on those licensing agreements with all those places. So it's, usually they're single user license, meaning it's just for Brent during his life.
Yeah.
So it gets kind of weird because technically the license ends upon your death. Now they do have what's called legacy settings. So the digital asset planning process, I have a checklist. Maybe I can direct people where to download it. But the first part is inventory, meaning what things do you care about that you want to live beyond you. The second step, so what I would tell you, Brent, so all 3 places that you mentioned, see if they have what's called legacy settings. I know Apple does now. They just barely got it, but you can add what's called a legacy contact, which is basically adding a beneficiary to all those accounts. You can say where it goes. So I encourage people to do that. That has the highest priority under the law. The next highest priority would be your digital asset trust. Leave specific instructions.
Okay, so
Um,
this would be, so in my case, for example, I have a master password keeper and then it's auto-generated passwords that, 20 characters long, whatever they are beyond that. So you're leaving then that information in terms of how someone accesses that to access everything else, like very specific instructions in a digital trust.
it's more directly to the company. It's saying,
Okay,
Apple, I want you to copy this account.
got it,
Because
got it.
if you just give someone the password or access to your password manager,
Yeah,
the problem with that is technically those accounts end upon your life.
right. Okay,
And if you read those licenses like no one does, it's always in there telling you not to share your password, right? It's
yeah,
like, this is for you only, this account's for you only, and it's during your life. Now, if you want to share it during your life, that's one thing, right? Where it's usually not an issue. A lot of people do it, right? They have multiple people access their accounts, but it gets kind of weird when you pass away because technically so does that account.
okay.
So
You're
that's what,
definitely informing me on something that I didn't was very blurry for me. So thank you for that.
yeah. So it's important to leave instructions. So in your case, all those pictures, the first thing would be if your loved ones knew how to get in there, which is a lot of times that's the case,
Mm,
where people are saved that way because they're able to get into the phone and then re-download them, or they have some way in. But I'm hearing more people where they're not able to get in. You know,
mm,
they their phone was locked or their computer was locked, or they can't get in anymore. So you may lose all those those are the real digital assets. Sometimes I call them the human assets, right? Like memories and things like that. So we can preserve those things.
yeah. Okay. Now I interrupted you there where you're making the segue into AI. So let's continue on that because I think that's a really, really exciting aspect of what's happening in our world right now.
Yeah. So you saw that AI video I did? I
Yes.
a few weeks ago, I went on, I was calling it like an AI binge. It's like, all right, like I'm gonna spend a weekend just like, get as much as I can, want to learn as much about this technology and what's possible and how to use it. Ended up watching some videos and little courses, and that video I made, that the crazy thing about it and what's so cool is I made it almost all with AI. That one where I
Hmm.
had that guy talking,
Yeah.
I so I have an application that I've worked with the developer that I use in my law practice, and it works on Microsoft Azure. And as you're probably aware of, they bought Chat GPT,
Yeah.
Microsoft did. So they're opening up some AI tools to be used in the Microsoft programs. And that's part of what got me excited, but I don't fully understand the tech side of it. I've worked with the developer on the front end, say, hey, here's what I want it to do. Like, how much and how long is this possible?
The only ones that I've been working with have been doing both Google Bard and ChatGPT. And what I've found is these are just they're just large language models. So it's kind of like the best analogy I can think of is this: is if you want to Google search a topic, it will bring up hundreds of different links. Some may be real, some may be not, some may be really useful, some could be utter garbage. What the AI program with the LLM models tend to do is they aggregate all of that data, good and bad, to craft a very normal sounding story, using sort of casual language that everyone is used to. So, like as an example, I was sitting down, I was fooling around with this over the weekend, actually, with my father-in-law. He's written several books on near-death experiences. About 5 of them are New York Times bestsellers. And he's like, explain this thing to me. Tell me what's going on here. And so this is a topic he knows a lot about. And so we got very drilled down and granular. He's like, no, that's not wrong. He goes, the person that's cited here did not have an NDE. They were actually the attending physician to that person that name. So it basically takes all this data and creates in some kind of a crazy fever dream and narrative. Now, I think it's very useful for structure. It's very useful for building, being able to build a storyline. But in terms of for your business, I think there's actually a case recently in New York where an attorney, I don't know if it's a criminal case or a civil case, but had cited some examples that he pulled off ChatGPT, but ChatGPT will cite things that don't exist. And so the opposing party realized that immediately, and the case was essentially thrown out. And the question is whether he loses his license to practice or not. I mean, so it's kind of crazy stuff. I mean, what are some of your thoughts working with some of these different platforms?
Yeah, I kind of view it as an assistant.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just let it run wild
No.
and just go and just trust it. But it's kind of like an assistant that you can use to get you started with a draft of something.
Yeah.
And then from there, you obviously got to check it. You can't just rely on it. But going back to the video that I made, what's cool about it, I use Chat GPT, and I paid the extra $20 for the Chat GPT 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I used it to educate me on it. So on what
Okay.
Microsoft Azure has, and then it started telling me things that I didn't understand, like heavy coding stuff. And it's like, no, I'm an attorney. Can you simplify this and focus on more basics? And then I asked it to create a job description for me for the type of programmer that I would need for the application that I have.
Okay.
So it was like having a conversation with someone, that's smarter than me in a topic, and they were able to teach me. And um, so I had it create that video script too.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
so I said, okay, create a video script, searching for engineers for this. And I did a few reiterations. I was like, I'll try to make it more entertaining.
Yeah.
Yeah, then several reiterations saying, add these points, take that out, focus on this.
Yeah. Do it in the voice of so and so. And yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. So it's amazing in that way where it's like an assistant. So one of the things I'm working on, it's my vision and my goal. I think we're gonna have it in a few years, is like a co-pilot for estate planning specifically, like a AI co-pilot. Like, hey, help me draft a trust for these clients. Here's the scenario. What what would you recommend?
Yeah.
So, and then boom, it'll spit that out, just like um what's interesting now though is as I meet with my developer, who obviously knows a lot more than I do. So far, the things that I want to do are, they may be better with code. If I want to put things into so the software we've developed is, I use it in my estate planning practice. So when we meet with the client, they enter the information in it before,
Mm-hmm.
like kids, assets, that type of information. And then I take that information and start designing their estate plan. like if we do a trust, who the trustee is, distribution, all of that. And then the software, it will draft the documents. It's not quite perfect, but I have a paralegal that will still go in and do the inputs because I'm
Mhm.
trying to make it one of the nice things about my software is it's designed to be used directly with the clients. So as an attorney, I'm doing all the inputs right when I'm with the clients. So
Right.
instead of having a lot of different choices that might bog it down, instead I'll just type in the notes of what I want to do, and then my paralegal will do it.
And so you developed this software yourself.
Yeah, I've worked with the web developer to create this software.
Now, how long have you been working on this?
A few years now.
Yeah.
So it's created over 1,000 estate plans. So
That's pretty. Have you had any other attorneys reach out to you and want to access that tool?
attorneys are kind of hard to work with. You know this.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you. I will say this as an aside: a great when you need a good attorney, anybody will be willing to pay whatever they can for a good attorney when that becomes necessary. And this is another great story that I'll throw out there for you, and then continue with what you're saying. So my grandfather, when he was much younger, tried to buy a building and hired the cheapest attorney in town that he could possibly get, and the building got bought out from under him. Ended up getting sold a lot later. He wanted this building. He really did. And so he went into the best attorney in town. We're talking 1950s in South Jersey at this point, and said, "I want to buy this building." And the attorney showed him as what he was going to be charging for this. And my grandfather balked and he said, "Mr. Mekosh," he said, "you want hamburger?" He goes, you pay the hamburger prices. You want filet? You got to pay the filet prices." He hired the good attorney. He got the building. The rest is history. So you get what you pay for, I think, for sure in that space. But please continue.
Yeah. So really, I was trying to expand it to other attorneys, but they're so set in their ways. I've just been using it in my own practice. And so instead of trying to sell other attorneys on it, it's like I'm just going to use it to be more efficient in my own practice.
Yeah,
And that's another part of the journey I've been on the last couple of years. I used to have more associate attorneys, but now it's like instead of supervising junior attorneys, I found that I'd rather practice law more instead of supervise people.
sure.
So even with junior attorneys, I was still having to do all the hard things, but it was even harder stepping in later versus if I'd have started in the beginning.
Right, right.
So it's like, all right, it's like, how much can I use technology and a team of people to increase my practice? So that way I'm doing, the high value ads, but not spending a lot of time on kind of the mundane stuff.
So you mentioned initially when you first got some of those first calls about clients wanting to find their parents' assets. 2002, I think, was the year you mentioned. When did you really start to recognize that the business of the legal profession was going to be changing very dramatically? And if you've been at this now for a couple of years in terms of developing your own proprietary system here, you're pretty far ahead of the curve. But when did that kind of light flash on for you that said, "Hey, if I want to stay in this profession really effectively for decades to come, I've got to change the way that people currently are doing business"? What was there? Was there a light bulb moment there?
I would say even the beginning of my career, that's what got me excited about it. So working in my dad's law firm during undergraduate, so during college, that's when I made the decision that I did want to go to law school. But I would say more so to get into the business of law because I feel like lawyers as businesses they're behind a lot of other mainstream businesses.
How so? How do you figure?
They're just old and set in their ways. So when I first got out of law school, I was trying to get the law firm to go paperless, and this was still like 5-10 years after most of the world had already gone that way.
Right.
And just I call it like that old school fear-based culture, where some attorneys they want people to be scared of them. I
Sure.
studied business management during college, so I always had the idea that I wanted to get in the business of law. And when I learned in regular management, like how other companies work, it's so different from some of the traditions that I've seen in other law firms.
Right. Well, again, I think that embracing technology earlier the way that you have, you must have been extremely well positioned when all of a sudden 2020 rolled around.
Yeah, luckily. So it was still a hard transition for us. I'll tell you, the before that, I was trying to encourage people to meet on Zoom more.
Yeah.
And I was telling my team, I was like, even though they think it's weird, just offer it. Like, I'm like, I just at least want you to say that that's an option. Like, they can meet in person, or we can do it via video. Um, and no one took that option, right? Pre 2020, like no one took that option. So I was ready for that. One of the challenges I feel like is I wasn't very good my first Zoom meetings. I didn't have the good teaching materials. Um, the very first one I had, it was a guy at home and his kids were running around and loud. It was a perfect first one. And I kind of blew it, I feel like, because I had a hard time keeping his attention. I was like, all right, that's it. I need to get better at the virtual presentation. So I developed, materials that I could use on the screen and, kind of moved all the process digital so much now that even my in-person meetings, I use my laptop, because I
Okay.
have all of our tools are digital that way. But that way I can do it both. That way, if they're
Yeah.
real life, virtual, I have a good process either way.
Now, what do you think the future of estate planning for your firm specifically, but overall will be? You mentioned obviously this virtual AI assistant, but does it go beyond that? Does it go deeper than that?
Yes and no. I feel like, some people are worried about AI taking their jobs and things like that, but you're still gonna need a human to run it the way I feel like it. At least the people that the good clients that come see me, they value my expertise and time. Um, I think a lot of what AI is going to bring, the internet's already brought that. Some people are like, they don't want to pay me. They're like, don't you just like press a couple of buttons? I'm like, yeah, exactly. But you're paying me because I know which buttons to push.
Right.
Like you can go get all this for free online. Like it's all, you can go get a whole estate plan for free. But the reason you're coming to me, or the reason, that I think the humans will still win out, is because we're going to use the technology just to emphasize our skills.
I agree with that. I think it's going to be a powerful tool to leverage what those skills are. And ultimately, at the bottom of this is someone that really embraces technology, that thinks that, as do you, it's going to create incredible efficiencies. Still, both you and I are in people businesses, and not every meeting has to be in person. Not everything has to be one on one. You can do a lot of it this way digitally, but ultimately, people want to know that you're there, that you care about them, that you know who they are, besides just what the numbers might be on a financial statement, or what the dictates might be of a trust. They want to have some confidence that you're really going to know who they are and what it is that they're trying to accomplish, both now and perhaps beyond the grave, in terms of continuing to direct those assets to things and people that they care about. So I'm with you in the sense that I don't find it intimidating. I want to understand it better, for sure, which is one of the reasons I want to have this conversation with you. But I think it's something that, like anything, is going to become a very powerful tool in the future. So
Yeah, as I said, I'm
yeah,
really excited. I feel like it's going to drop off a lot of people, right, that aren't willing to make the change. So I feel like it's a chance to level up just by learning these tools and getting there.
I
So
completely agree with you. Now, let me ask you this: if someone I'm going to ask you two questions to wrap up here. First, if someone wants to learn more about you and what you do, how do they find you?
I think go to my YouTube channel, which is Rilus Law on YouTube, or also my website, which is riluslaw.com. So it's RILUSLAW. One of the tools I have on there on my website is a free last will and testament. I got a place where I take away all the excuses. I got a template they can download, and they can write out their own will, so they can have something in place.
That's everybody that has not done that should for sure pop on and do that, definitely. And and I guess last question is, if listeners out there might be thinking, you know what, because you actually struck my nerves here in terms of the digital assets. I hadn't really thought about really all those memories. What are some of the things that are out there, or what's something they should be considering if they have not addressed their estate plan in a while?
I'd say look at pictures and videos, right? Like, do you have a plan for those? Where are you keeping them? Do you have a plan to transfer those? And that could be as easy as going into legacy settings and setting up someone to transfer your account to for those things. The estate planning is really important. I joke and say if you don't like your family, it's important. Or if you're not in a traditional situation, where maybe you're not married, right? You have a significant other for 20 years, but there's no legal relationship, or you have children that you have no relationship with. So that's when it's really important to put it in writing what you want, because the default beneficiaries probably don't meet your wishes.
True, and I also think that if you have people in your lives that you care about, you owe it to them to make sure they're not left with confusion and a mess, because it'll be something that'll be incredibly difficult for people to deal with anyway. And those that are left behind should have as clear a roadmap as feasibly possible for all these assets, both virtual and otherwise. So I think that you're absolutely bringing up some great points there. Rilus, I really want to thank you so much, and I know you've given me a lot to think about. And thanks for taking some time out of your day to join me.
Thanks for having me. I always love talking about technology and some of those topics. So thank you.
Gentlemen, this has been fantastic. Brent, you and I have talked about AI before. Rilus, I don't know if you've ever heard of CRISP, but CRISP is an AI software. I've been using it, and I'm just curious. It's funny because, Brent, as you mentioned, this is something that will assist people, but it's not the full answer because it doesn't get things quite right. So as an example, CRISP it removes all background noise, but that's great. And it's the best I've ever seen. But the other thing it does is it creates summaries, detailed summaries. And so from one of the conversations I had with another client that I was working with, it had 19 points in the summary. And one of it was when we were talking about CRISP, I was telling them about CRISP and what it does. And here's what it wrote about itself. It said AI software. The participants talked about an AI software called CRISP that can cancel background noise during recordings. They discussed its features, including generating summaries and action item lists for free as part of the service. I thought that was pretty good, right? It wrote it really well, except for it misspelled its own name.
Well, I'll
So-
say along those lines. So we had our, Raymond James Financials, obviously the mothership for me, and we had our national conference about 3-4 weeks ago, and our CEO was up there, and they were basically going over some implementations that we're going to be using for different AI platforms, and they brought ChatGPT up, and ChatGPT completely gave a totally incorrect bio for both our CEO, for the company, and everything else. And it basically, again, it amalgamated a lot of data that was close but not quite the real thing. So it's I think it's really fantastic technology that's definitely going to take us to a much more efficient place in the future, but it has to be managed. It's got to be managed by people. And Rilus, I think you've done a heck of a job doing that in your practice.
Yeah, it's exciting. Well, I keep saying the future is going to get weird with these brain implants.
I'm not going to be the beta. I'm not going to be
voice.
the beta tester for that personally.
Yeah, you don't want that first gen one.
No.
Yeah, exactly. And then you got to read all the licensing to update your own brain software. Hey, guys, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. And of course, our last thank you will always go to the listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Smart Money Simplified podcast with Brent Mekosh. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Brent comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. And we humbly ask that you share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, as this actually does help others find the show. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at MP Advisors, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.